Devastating female rulers aren't something we often think of when we think of the word queen, but some queens would give even the world's most fearsome male rulers a run for their money. It's never been easy for women throughout history, whether they were born into power and nobility or not. And sometimes this has caused those who were born with a higher status to become ruthless to get what they want and preserve what they have. This is what is said of Empress Zetian, one of the few female rulers in China's history, and perhaps the only one believed to hold true power. To protect her authority, she was willing to turn on even those closest to her. She may have taken out her own mother, preserving her own power, as well as 2 of her grandchildren. Have you ever heard of the legend of Bloody Mary? Well, this is the woman that inspired it. Queen Mary I had a personal vendetta against Protestantism, and after we had already gone through a holy war where Protestantism ended up on top following the Great English Reformation, she decided she wanted to return England to Catholicism once more, and made it illegal to be a Protestant. Were you caught, the punishment for being a heretic, a Protestant, was to be burned at the stake. Hundreds were burned under Queen Mary's short rule. This next unspeakable act is kind of a badass one, to be honest, and one that some may even admire. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I think I maybe admire it myself, so we're gonna take a break from some of the heavier ones and go to something a little lighter. Not so unspeakable in a way that we really need to condemn her, so to speak, at least not as I understand it, years later, and having never met her or the others involved in this scandal. I could see her story being the hotly debated subject of an AITA post on Reddit, and I think my answer would be, no, Marguerite, you are not the jerk in this scenario. Marguerite was the sister of King Henry III, and was also the Queen of France by marriage. However, she struggled to provide her husband with an heir, and in frustration, she was sent away. Clearly, her marriage was a challenging one, it would seem, to put it lightly. During her time staying with her brother, it's believed she conceived a child with her lover, très scandaleuse. As a result, she was not only exiled by her own brother, the King of England, but of course also by her husband, the King of France. Eventually, she was able to convince her husband to let her come home, and for a time, there she remained until she realized she was basically over him and their awful marriage, and instead decided to just basically up and leave and go to side with the Holy Catholic League, claiming that she was actually fit to be a leader in her own right, aka she didn't need no man. An even more scandalous and honestly genius move, because at this time the Catholics and the Protestants were at war, and her husband was a Protestant. Wow. While not an outright queen herself, this next woman did have her eyes on the throne. We're talking about the Marquise de Montespan, whose nickname actually was, for some time, the true Queen of France. She aimed higher than her station and managed to capture the eye and heart of the king. Despite being married, he spent much of his time with the Marquise, showering her in gifts and keeping her as a mistress. Seeing this as a window of opportunity, she would have 7 children with the king, and also separated from her husband so she could spend more time at court with him and actually with the queen herself. However, all her aspirations went up in smoke when she conspired with a witch. Yeah, the witch made her love potions, and when people ended up poisoned at the court, all eyes, not just the king's, turned on her. She got off easy by comparison to the so-called witch though, Madame Catherine Montvoisin. Montvoisin ended up burned at the stake, whereas Montespan traded her lavish court life for the quiet one of a convent. But hey, at least she got to keep her life. This next Mary definitely sounds like she was up to no good, but perhaps because she herself was also poorly treated, which drove her in turn to lash out at her own tormentors, at least in one of the cases against her here, which would be the belief that she conspired against her husband and succeeded in having him killed. This though apparently happened after Mary, Queen of Scots, was mistreated by him, who shortly after marrying her set about tormenting her by doing things like having her close friend slain in front of her, while she was pregnant, no less. When her husband, the king, mysteriously died, the people of Scotland were suspicious of her. She would eventually be forced to abdicate her throne as a result of the scandal, and would later be accused of conspiring to kill the Queen of England, Elizabeth I, her cousin. Isabella of France was married to the King of England, Edward II. She was the queen for a time with him, but took up a lover due to being significantly neglected by her husband, who himself had a lover, Hugh Despenser. When she gave her husband, the king, an ultimatum to either leave his lover or lose her, Edward chose Hugh. As a result, Isabella took up permanent residence in France. She would return to England though with her own lover, Roger Mortimer, in tow, after succeeding in a plot to take take the crown from her husband, King Edward, forcing him to abdicate. She would rule alongside Mortimer in her husband's place until later when her son Edward III would inherit the throne after coming of age. When it comes to the pursuit of power, many of those on our list find a commonality in their ruthless determination to keep and maintain any power they can. Enter Queen Consort FREDEGUND. She gained her place as queen by worming her way into the king's heart and convincing him to leave his first wife and then later kill his second, with Fredegund eventually, of course, taking her place. Not only that, but when his second wife's sister Brunhild found out about her sister's demise, Fredegund successfully had her eliminated too. Queen Ranavalona, the first of Madagascar, is a controversial figure thanks to her commitment to protecting her power and her country. She became a ruler of Madagascar in the 1800s after her husband died. She quickly seized the crown for herself and even apparently eliminated her uncle to protect her rule. It's also believed she may have taken out his mother too, but if she did so in a pretty awful way, as she refused to spill a noblewoman's blood. So she might have done this through methods of extreme hunger or starvation. Pretty terrible way to go. This next entry was an empress as opposed to a queen, but you know, basically the same thing, hailing from the Byzantine Empire. She became power-hungry after tasting what it was like to rule in her son Constantine's place. Eventually, Constantine rose up and took power back from his mother, and the two came to an understanding after that and decided to share the rule together. However, this was not enough for Irene, and when Constantine's image waned with the people after he divorced his wife to marry his mistress, Irene took this opportunity to eliminate him entirely, despite the fact that yes, he was her own son. She had him gruesomely blinded, and it was said shortly thereafter he died from his injuries. Some believe, however, that he actually just went into exile after this and did continue to live, but just agreed to live a quiet life from there on out. Whether he died or not though, being blinded in that way by your own mom is pretty brutal. There's a reason this next queen's name is so well known, and it isn't a good reason either. Countess Elizabeth Bathory was considered to be one of the most cruel of all queens in history, as she used her power to commit unspeakable crimes and got away with it for years. We don't know how many people exactly lost their lives to Bathory, but it was enough for rumors about her to extend into the future more than 500 years later. Today, she's been immortalized in some media as a famous vampire, a fiction that was dreamt up by those inspired by the gruesome stories of her and her crimes. Bathory was believed to target, torment, and eliminate those who were below her in terms of class, preying on her own subjects and even her own servants. There are stories about her bathing in the blood of her victims, but this might not be exactly what happened. It could be even a lavish embellishment that blossomed out of the fact of something else that was really terrible, that she was known to feast on her victims, while in some cases also forcing them to feast on parts of themselves. Yeah. All in all, it's believed she took the lives of apparently more than 600 women. That's about it for this one. I've been your guest host, Amanda McKnight, aka Vampex13, and I'll see you in the future.